Hey guys, want to welcome you to the Church Scattered podcast. In fact, it is our first podcast. We're really excited about that. My name's Chris Bell. I'm the lead pastor of Three Circle Church in coastal Alabama. And on the podcast with me today is another one of our founding team members and the author of the new book that's coming out right now called Church Scattered, my good friend Dan Greer. Dan, great to have you on the podcast today.
Hey, glad to be here, Chris.
Yeah, we're excited about this. We are a four-person team right now. Noel Fenderson, great business leader in Memphis, Tennessee, in that region, and then Blake Stanley, also a great executive pastor at Three Circle Church, and speaks all over the place on leadership topics. They're a part of the team as well, and we're really excited to introduce you guys to the movement, the book, and the network that we call Church Scattered. And Dan, as we just dive right into that idea of Church Scattered, I think often, because I'm in the church world, I've been a pastor and in ministry for over 20 years. I'm a practitioner, pastor a great church, multi-site church, and I think I probably speak for a lot of guys in the church world when we hear the idea of Church Scattered. It's tough. We almost have a defensive mechanism that goes off because so much of our energy and time, and if I'm honest, so much of my resources, energy, and time has gone into the church gathered, the weekend experience. And I think the idea here is that we've missed so much in making that the driving force. And so what I love about what we're trying to do with Church Scattered is we're not pitting the two against each other. And I love how you say it, Dan, that a church that gathers well should also scatter well. And that when we scatter well, it's going to impact the church gathered in extremely positive ways. Would you agree with that, Dan?
I would, and I almost liken it, Chris, to when I was a church leader, and I'd have a team of people coming back from an international mission trip. They were different; they had been changed. Their life spiritually had gone to another level, and everybody that heard their story, it had the same impact to a degree on them. So for me, it's the same concept. When Christians effectively live out their faith all during the week, and they come to the gathered experience or their small group experience, it works both ways. They're actually making that better. They're inspiring and motivating other believers to live out their faith as well. So it's all the church.
Right.
I think that's part of what we've been missing. We've kind of, again, taken our eye off the calling that we have on us to gather well, through corporate worship, minister to one another through body life. But at the same time, we're on mission, and we are to go to work every day and represent Christ in the best possible way we can. So
love it.
Not an either or, of both and.
Yeah, so just coming from two, I mean, you've been, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, but you've been in both the corporate and business world as a believer and living out your faith there. And then, of course, you've been involved in the church world in mega church settings, small church settings. And so me coming from the church side, I just want to pull the defensiveness down immediately so that guys go, okay, these guys aren't throwing stones at the gathered church. Not at all. We're a part of it. We love the gathered church. But I think what we are ultimately committed to is the gospel and the kingdom of God and what he's up to. And we just believe that we at this point in history, it is time for us to focus on the church scattered in a new and innovative and really focused way. And as we look at that, I think what's amazing about this, Dan, you and I have been talking about this for over a year and preparing for the launch of this network and the book and all that went along with that. And then the pandemic hit. And I think some may look at it and go, wow, really good timing, guys. Well, we don't get any credit for it because we didn't plan it this way, right? I mean, this thing came upon us, and we realized that we certainly do see God's hand in kind of preparing us for this moment. And I think you've seen the same thing, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's as long as I've been involved in all these areas, both as a corporate leader, a church leader, and a very committed Christian since I came to Christ at a very, early age, it's always been to me a point of, how can I live out my faith each and every day?
Yes.
Because even at the very beginning, as someone who didn't grow up in the church, I read the New Testament and I just assumed I was in full-time ministry. Nobody told me any different at the time.
Right.
So I started talking about Jesus at work every day. I mean, why not? I mean, that's sort of what he said to do.
You mean, Dan, you didn't adhere to the invisible lines that we've drawn so often for people?
No, I didn't even know they existed. I did find out later that they were there.
Oh, someone straightened you out.
Well, they tried.
I got you.
And I ignored most of them, but
Thank
got
goodness.
a little wiser and realized that it's just not quite that simple.
Right.
However, to your point, it does give me a unique perspective in that I have sat in the pew as much as I have stood on the platform. And I get it from both sides.
Yes.
And what we have to do here is stop talking over each other and start talking to each other. And the idea to me of, a local church pastor like yourself with your great team, working together with all of your corporate leaders, all of your
Right.
committed believers that are in your church, and trying to plan collectively how you reach the Mobile Bay Area and impact the world for Christ. That's
Right.
the dynamic here. It is literally empowering the church to reach its maximum potential. And one of the things also, Chris, and I appreciate one of our endorsers saying this, we're not, quote, progressives trying to create something new and different. We're actually going back to the book of Acts. And,
Correct.
the amazing thing to me, and it sort of started this, in my heart a long time ago, that, after the resurrection and, after the Great Commission and Pentecost and signs and wonders and
Right.
people were coming to Christ by the multitudes, we don't even get to chapter 7 before persecution starts kicking in, and we
Right.
lose one of our great leaders. And all of a sudden, chapter 8, it literally just says divine disruption. God scattered the people. And why did he do that? Well, he wanted the gospel to go to the nations, to the Gentiles. So it's not really a new concept. God has been scattering his people throughout the Bible to get them back on mission and prioritize representing him to the world.
Yeah, I love you. You use that word disruption. And again, people may be surprised that this is a biblical concept. And it's interesting to me, you bring up the apostles and the early church, and as dynamic as we want to kind of romanticize that time, the fact is they were a little bit disobedient in the beginning. They wanted to hang out in Jerusalem. They kind of wanted to stay there, and you see God allowing this massive disruption. So on one hand, disruption is an old idea from the Bible. Also, us hanging on to our safety net there and staying where we are is also an old concept. And so what I see, and I think chapter 1 of the book, which I just love, Dan, the idea of global disruption, you wrote that before the pandemic, but now we're seeing that the church literally, in very similar to the book of Acts, has been scattered. We literally can't, at this point, as we record this podcast, Three Circle Church has not met in our buildings, 4 campuses, in 2 months. And I think some churches are beginning to meet, but it doesn't look like it used to look. I mean, everything has changed. And I think one thing we have to do, and you and I are kind of beating this drum right now, and the Church Scattered Network will continue to, is that we need to see that if we believe God's sovereign, he was sovereign over this disruption as well. And to your point in the book and now, he is going to leverage global disruption for the advancement of the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally believe that. And one thing we just have to accept, and we really did to a degree before COVID-19, but now we really do. But Christians in the 21st century are going to have to get very comfortable with disruption. It's all around us. It's happening almost, every other week something happens globally. And we are in a global economy. The power of technology can change everything so quickly.
Right.
And so the reality is, disruption forces us to accept the fact we cannot go back to where we were. And so it's really important in understanding Christianity in the 21st century, what disruption really is. It's not just a realignment. It is a transformation. It requires us to do something totally differently.
Before we move on, Dan, what is the difference in the two? Because I totally agree with you, but I do think the old playbook for us has normally been, here's disruption, all of this change. How can we tweak things a little bit? And you're saying this is going to require far more than tweaking an old game plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just use the most obvious example today. Because of COVID-19 and the dynamics of shelter in place, and I wouldn't really want to be owning a lot of commercial office space right now.
Right.
I cannot tell you how many people I know that have been offered by their large companies the opportunity to continue to work from home.
Yes.
Well, we know what that means. And so that is going to be a consequence of this disruption. That's just one of many. And you think about, here in Memphis, for example, FedEx is obviously our largest employer. They've been a very innovative company since the very beginning. And so we see a lot in the press about, the supply chain. And, they've literally created a robot that can deliver the package to your home.
Wow.
They're literally talking about drone technology and delivering a package to your home. But it would be easy for us to think that the robots and the drones are really disruptive. No, what's really disruptive is e-commerce.
Yeah.
Everything that happened since then has been a transformation to e-commerce.
Right.
And, taking with the whole COVID-19 dynamic, the joke that's been out there on social media is that if Chick-fil-A had been given the responsibility for testing everyone, we'd already all be tested because of their drive-through process.
Mm-hmm.
And
they just wouldn't do it on Sunday, but the rest of the week, they'd be all over it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that they do that, and I see them with their leveraging innovation to turn their whole parking lot into a pickup area.
Right.
And so we think, wow, they're really innovative. They're really disruptive. No, actually, that's just again innovation around the ultimate disruption, which I'm old enough, you're not, but I can remember the disruption of the fast food industry.
Sure.
And so that's the disruption. And we've got to see how big of a deal disruption is.
Right.
To your point, many times God doesn't initiate it. He doesn't cause it, but he does use it, and he does leverage it. And so when we think about the church today, or we think about Christianity today, I do believe that he is divinely disrupting his people again. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Right.
And if you think about it, a third of the churches in North America now need hospice care. They're not going to make it.
Right.
Another third of the churches haven't grown in over 10 years. And unless something happens, they're not going to make it either. Fortunately, a third of the churches are reaching people. They are growing. Mm-hmm. But the other side of this disruption in the church world is 85%, according to Barna and all the other people that research this, the Rainers of the world, 85% of 3 entire generations are not attending anybody's church.
Right.
So the idea is, from a spiritual standpoint, I think God is trying to get our attention that something is broken. It is totally disrupted. We're declining in our effectiveness and have been for quite some time. So again, I think he's basically saying, guys, quit tweaking multi-site and quit tweaking teaching pastors and right now media. You're going to have to actually tear this thing down and go back to the beginning of the book of Acts and find out, the message is sacred, but the methods are not. Right. So how do we create the church of the 21st century that's going to be effective in accomplishing our mission?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just coming from a church guy, when I hear you say that, you talked about 3 categories: the hospice care, which is something we want to talk a lot about because it sounds like we're being kind of bad news guys here. But in order to see, because I think I want all the listeners and viewers to understand, we are not hopeless on this thing. We believe the best opportunities for the gospel in human history lie just ahead of us right now. And so, but what we do have to do is take a painful look sometimes at where we are to understand where we have to go. And I see this already happening. So what we've described as a disruption actually has happened. The entire world has been disrupted. Church world turned upside down. But what I hear a lot, Dan, in conversations, I see it online, is that it seems that pastors and leaders in the church world, at least, seem to they cannot wait to get back to what I hear is described as normal. Let's get back to, it's like as soon as we can, let's run back. And what that's going to do, that's tweaking. That's going back to the old playbook when the opportunities ahead of us are there, but it's going to require deeper change. And as a church guy, I often think, even at Three Circle, we've been talking about the fact that we have seen such opportunity in this situation, ways to get better at what we do. Instead of just running back to the old playbook, let's look at the opportunities that are actually in front of us. So what would you say to a guy like me, and there's tons of them out there that are leading a church, why should they not be afraid? Why is what you just described actually good news for the future, that there's opportunities ahead of us if we will change our focus?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing, again, is if you just look at the resources that are available to you and how you can empower and delegate, to your members so that they can, not just one day a week, but 7 days a week, be living out their faith.
Man, that's huge.
And the whole idea of turning members into missionaries is the way I like to think about it. And so literally what happens on Sunday morning, it becomes a setup for the rest of the week where every Christian is living on mission rather than the payoff for, everybody coming and kind of getting their cup full. And then they go back out and sort of live their own life on their own. And we've got to find a way to align and work together because it's incredible to think about the fact that if every church member were growing spiritually and every church member was embracing their sacred calling to know Christ and make him known each and every day, the potential impact for the church, the bride of Christ, globally would be incredible.
Absolutely.
And I think, again, gosh, you really don't need anointing and power unless you're doing something powerful. And so I think way too much for me as a church leader of what we were able to do didn't quite honestly require a whole lot of supernatural power of God to get it done. If you're going to live out your faith 7
Did you really just say that out loud, Dan?
Now you're in a totally different world.
Yeah, I think you just said that out loud, and
I did.
Yes, and I think it needs to be said because, and again, we're not knocking pragmatics. We want to be good leaders. We want to learn best practices, but at the end of the day, we are in a supernatural venture. This thing called the gospel and the church. And it's funny when you talk about that here at Three Circle when the pandemic happened, we went online real fast, and we were able to do that. But the old way of thinking was very much entrenched the way it is at every church. Hey, church, whether we want to believe it or not, people see church as where we go, that place we go. So we tried to be very intentional in our language, Dan, to let everyone know, and we've said it for 2 months, we never closed Three Circle Church. We closed buildings, but we never closed Three Circle Church. So now it's interesting to me as things begin to loosen up a little, I see this kind of language being used across the country with churches. We're going to reopen the church. I think it's dangerous language because I think it undercuts the theological stance that we should be taking, and it's always been true that church, these aren't, as you put it, these aren't holy places. God's always wanted a holy people, and these buildings are just tools, and you use language that we've really grabbed on to here at Three Circle. Sunday has to become a setup, not a payoff. And when that happens, here where I am, the guy who welds metal at the shipyards in Mobile Bay, if I can get that guy to see that place where he works Monday through Friday can become sacred ground if he will embrace his sacred calling, now we're off to the races if that can happen.
Absolutely.
So when I look at that, Dan, How do churches and business leaders, because we're talking to both as we take a look at this disruption. We've talked a lot about how it changes for the church. What has changed for the folks in the pews? And sometimes they get it quicker than we do in the church, because the entrepreneur, the business owner, they're looking at some realities right now that are scary, but there's opportunities there as well.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to have to get comfortable with as Christians in the 21st century is talking about the whole idea of contextualization, because that's really the way missionaries think when they're trying to reach people in a different culture. And so what is happening today in corporate America, to your point, is extremely encouraging. I've never been more encouraged by what God is doing in corporate America to reach people for Christ, whether it's Business as Missions or C12 or Convene or Right Now Media at Work. I mean, there's a lot that God is doing out there. And what is aligning that is extremely encouraging is I've been in corporate leadership for 50 years,
Okay.
and I've never seen a time where corporate leadership best practice was more closely aligned with biblical truth, because what has happened is it used to be all about competency and
Yes.
your education and your experience. Well, what's moved to the top of the list now is character. And so you're talking about literally training corporate leaders to have honesty, integrity, humility, to be servant leaders. We're even talking about the whole concept of mindfulness, which is nothing more than prayer,
Right.
And stopping and refocusing, for your next set of priorities. And so the reality is corporate America, what they value most, which is character now in its leaders.
Which is a huge
so
paradigm
closely-
shift.
Excuse me?
That's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, it is
right? I mean, it
dramatic.
used to be bottom line, and there is this new awareness that bottom line thinking is not enough.
Well, what is happening again with the generational shifts and the disruptions that are happening there is if you're trying to hire and retain Gen X and millennial leaders, you're going to have to recognize the things they value. They
So true.
value a high trust culture.
Yes.
They value empowerment and delegation. They value leaders that have integrity and character. They are fine with making a profit as long as the organization is willing to make a difference with that profit and maybe invest in inner city schools or whatever.
Right.
And so you think about it, we've got 3 generations that have changed what's really important to them. So when they go to find a job, they're looking for companies that value character. Think about that. And
Huge.
so the tragedy, going back to what you said, is we as Christians and as the church, we have allowed ourselves to be identified with the place rather than the people of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people think about Christianity, they don't think about honesty and integrity and humility and servant
Right.
leadership. They think about the building and the place and the gathering.
Yes.
And so what has happened, cultural Christianity has taken on a negative connotation, and we'll talk about that later. And so what is exciting to me, though, is the same 3 generations that are looking for character-driven leadership at work are the same 3 generations that are not coming to the church gathered.
Right.
So perfect, disruptive timing.
Unbelievable.
That the Father wants to empower the church gathered to scatter during the week to display those character qualities in the workplace so that these people can see the reality of Christ in our lives.
Yeah, 100%. It's very interesting. So, I'm a product of the 80s and 90s. So I'm kind of right in the middle of this game called life right now, and I've been watching with great anticipation The Last Dance that's been going on right now with Michael Jordan, and I have found a fascinating parallel. It's interesting to watch modern, especially millennials, and in church world and across the board, Dan, I think millennials get beat up a lot. They're so entitled and this and that, and it's interesting that here at Church Scattered, certainly every generation has its weaknesses, but every generation also has its strengths. And one thing I think that's beautiful about, because half of my staff are millennials, and they want purpose, they want character. So it's been interesting for me to watch Michael Jordan, who was one of my heroes growing up. He comes across in The Last Dance as this ruthless, cruel, bottom line, and it is shocking. The guys that grew up in the 80s and the 90s are on Twitter and Instagram going, this guy's awesome. This is why he's great. And the millennials are going, we wouldn't want to play with that guy. It's interesting. Same thing. So for me as let's take that to church and leadership, okay? So I grew up 80s and 90s. It was all about come and see. Great sermon series, right? All of that. So I don't think anything's wrong with that, so to speak. Your sermon series should be great. We should be creative. But when that becomes like 85% of what you're doing, you're missing the boat. And this has awakened me. It's opened my eyes to the fact that we as a church, a local church, we have left so much square footage untapped when it comes to our opportunities for the gospel.
Yeah, and what has happened, Chris, and this is a deep into the pool subject, but cultural Christianity to me is a version of Christianity that is primarily formed by our culture. And so the point being, I don't think church pastors that are leading large churches are a bunch of egotistical, self-centered, prima donnas. That's a bad rap.
Absolutely.
And what people have to understand as Christians in the marketplace is they were never trained to lead corporate executives any more than corporate executives were trained to preach sermons.
Good.
And
good
so
point.
you can't really just come to a simplistic, why don't they train us, or why don't they equip us? Why don't they empower us? Well, the answer is, they were never trained
Right.
or equipped or
They don't know
empowered
how.
to do that.
They don't know how.
And so what has to happen here is a massive shift institutionally so that the church leaders are trained and equipped, just like the corporate leaders need to be trained and equipped, so they can speak the same common leadership language around biblical truth and mission. And both sides are going to have to meet in the middle. And so this isn't an intentional thing. But to your point, when the culture identifies Christianity more with the place than the people,
Right.
and when the average Christian identifies Christianity more with the place than the people, then
Right.
you can see why we're where we are.
Absolutely.
And so to change that, to become the people of God, representing God every day, it's going to require training and equipping on both sides.
Yes.
Everything related to church leadership, corporate leadership, so that we can align together to really become the great force that we were called to be.
Which is why I'm so excited about this. That's exactly what Church Scattered is all about. That's what we want to do. We want to come alongside churches and business leaders. And really the kind of trifecta that we're looking at, that our entire network is built on, is helping people in those three main areas: the home, work, and the church. And when those become integrated, when there's a synergy among those three environments, we see the lid blow off of this thing in the best of ways. And I think one thing, as we kind of land the plane on this first podcast, is we want to encourage people that we do believe there's a path into this future that God has for us. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require a lot of change. As you said, it's going to require a lot of people coming to the middle and joining hands and learning from one another. But I do believe that some of our best days are ahead of us. And I think the big thing that I would love to kind of bring to a close here, Dan, is the idea that we don't have to be afraid of this. That this isn't something to fear. This change could be really good, and it's doable. And it's not that you're just going to stop caring about Sundays. It's not that we stop caring about the gathered, but this new focus, we really do believe is required right now.
Well, the highest level of disruption is not with the church as we think about it. It's with Christianity as a whole. And what that does, to your point, it impacts everything in your life. You know, how well are you leading yourself? How well are you leading your family and your marriage? How is your parenting being impacted by your faith? Much less taking your faith to work. And what the culture wants to do is to segment everything. because they're perfectly happy for us to segment, our family and maybe our friends and maybe work, and they don't mind us going to church on Sunday. That's no big deal. They are perfectly comfortable with us going to the place and doing what we do at the place, and then coming back and doing everything else we do just like we have been doing. And what segmentation does is it minimizes the role of faith in every area of your life.
That's right.
It minimizes the impact it has on us as an individual Christian. And then that puts the lid on our influence with other people, our children, our spouse, our neighbors, everybody. So what biblically, I believe the New Testament and Jesus calls us to do is tear down all that segmentation and be absolutely all in, 100% all in, and let faith influence every area of our life. So the heaviest lift on Christianity for 21st century isn't going to be church methodology. It's going to be Christians stepping up and owning what they've been called to do as a believer. And their sacred calling is there to be a Christian leader, and all the implications of what that means. Their purpose in life is very clear biblically. They're to know him and make him known. Why do we do that? It's the gratitude for the grace of God in our life. And how do we do that? And that's where I think we're going to bring something different to this conversation, because people normally think of the will of God as what you do at work, when in reality that is such a small piece of this, because who you are, you're a Christian leader, what's your purpose in life, to know him and make him known. Why? Gratitude for grace. That never changes.
Right. It's
always the same. The how part changes all the time.
It has to.
But what we've done is we've made that the most sacred part of all. And so we think that the clergy are obviously more sacred than somebody who's, driving a truck for FedEx.
Right.
And there's nothing in the New Testament that says that. And so we're literally at a point now, what we're saying is that, understand that it's just as sacred to be a stay-at-home mom as it is to be a CEO of a Fortune 100 company. It's just as sacred to be a teacher in the first grade in a secular school system as it is to be a missionary in Africa. And so once we tear down all of this segmentation between the professional clergy and the average Christian, and we're all called to the same standard, at that point in time, there are no second-class, Christians anymore. Right. You don't ever have to worry about, there's all the trained seminary people, and they're the ones that know all about the Bible, and, I'm kind of going to come and listen to them tell me. No, you've got the Holy Spirit of God. You've got the Word of God. And 1 John says that ultimately you need no one teach you other than the Holy Spirit that you have within you. So flipping this whole thing, the big challenge would be, okay, Christians, if you think that the real problem is going to be that church leaders are not going to be willing to give you the responsibility to live out your faith, you're missing it. They're going to be willing to give it to you. They need to be trained to know how to do it. The biggest challenge is going to be every Christian is going to have to take that baton. They're going to have to be willing to step up. And the one thing I would say about the Michael Jordan thing, and I watched it as well, passion that's misdirected, that we would see in almost sort of an unbiblical, selfish way, is nothing more than just sheer passion.
Right.
However, if you are absolutely passionate about Christ and knowing him and making him known, you don't want to leave anything on the field. You want to spend your whole life, as Paul said, running your race and finishing it well, and absolutely doing everything you can to reach the largest number of people.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn there. I find it fascinating, though, that as you pointed out, it's interesting that the secular world, without a biblical worldview, has moved to this understanding that character really does matter, and that if we're going to have a generation, a workforce that's full of millennials, that they don't want just the old 80s, 90s bottom line. But the problem is, and we're going to dive into this in our next podcast, the problem is the world seems to be changing their scorecard faster than the church is. And that's a big deal, because we now live in a time where the world's actually changed to this new model, and the church is still hanging on to a bottom line mentality, an 80s and 90s type Bottom line, how many seats are filled on Sunday? How many people can we get in the building? We think that needs to change. We're going to talk about that in the next podcast. Dan, we got a book coming out called Church Scattered. How can they get that book? We're really excited about it.
Well, first place I'd encourage everybody to go is just our website, Church Scattered,
Right.
and check it out. And the book is on the website, and obviously the book is available on Amazon. You can find it there. And really the primary, purpose of the book is to help Christians live out their faith, starting at home. If it doesn't work there, nothing else really matters.
That's right.
And so you really need to be all in there. You need to lead yourself well. You need to lead your family well. And then, the Holy Spirit that is living within you on Sunday morning is living within you while you have your quiet time, is also going to be going with you to work. So since he's going with you to work, then why don't you let him help you with your work? And trust me, the book brings out a lot of illustrations about how that works.
Yeah.
And so hopefully people can grasp that merging work and faith, leadership and life, personal and professional, sacred and secular, all of this is Christianity for the 21st century.
Love it. So if you're watching or listening today, guys, this is really an introduction to who we are, and go check out the book. As Dan said, go to the website. Podcast will continue to come, and we'll continue to dive into these subjects. And really, this is an integration. This is a whole life approach that we're wanting to look at: home, church, and work. And those are environments that we all, as believers, are walking in and living in. And I think that you're going to find these conversations helpful. If this first podcast has piqued your interest, we would love for you to check out the next one, sign up for them, and also tell your friends about it. Tell your friends about what we're doing here at Church Scattered. This is a network. This is a movement, and we're really excited because we think the best days for all of us as believers are ahead of us. We have opportunities, not just obstacles, and we want to help you take advantage of all of that. So thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you the next time on the Church Scattered podcast.